And welcome to Coffee Hour on 16th of June at 10 a.m. I do hope that you're all safe and are, well, getting along with the current situation. Excuse me. It's been a rather curious week in terms of where I thought we were going and where I think we're ending up. In Florida, there's been an increase in the number of COVID-19 cases. Yes, apparently there's a lot more testing being done, but there's been an uptick in hospitalizations, etc., etc. And as I've always said, I'm following the science. And what I was hoping is that this coming Sunday, the 21st, I think, would be the first time we would be able to expand the church membership within the church from having 10 people in there to having 44, which would be the maximum number for the size of the building and maintaining social distancing. But after looking at what's going on and having discussed what's going with the vestry, how we should move forward, we've decided to push the date back until the 4th of July. And we hopefully, God willing, we will be able to have the expanded congregation. I think some of us may be expanding in more ways than one because this enforced stay-at-homeness is certainly doing nothing for my waistline. Good morning, Karen. It's good to see you. So that's the kind of news that the vestry and myself decided that we're not changing what we're doing. We're still maintaining 10 people in the church, following all the safety protocols. We're also looking ahead. The church building's pretty much sorted as in terms of how it needs to be for when people do turn up. So all that's good. We've got all the sanitizers. We've got any masks needed if people don't bring them. Most of the protocols are in place. Just need to print them off and get them on the doors. And hopefully by the 4th of July, which would be a kind of very fitting date to meet together for the first time, we'll be able to do that. Good morning to Mike and Jennifer and Jeannie. It's good to see you all. As I said, I hope everybody's doing okay. Now, a bit of news, and please pass this on because I may forget to mention this to Margot and or Jay. But next Tuesday, there won't be a coffee morning. I've got a prior engagement that I need to be at, and I don't know how long it's going to take before I get out and can get back home. So next Tuesday, which would be 23rd, there will not be a coffee morning. So if you could pass that along to everybody, that would be great. I'll try and remember to put an advert in as well on Facebook and YouTube. So with talk of the COVID-19, I want to discuss a little morning. Good morning, Emily, and hello to Kit. I want to discuss the kind of current situation as I perceive it from watching Margot. Thank you. Yes, please update the bulletin. The TV news in particular is beginning to get bored with the idea of COVID-19. So its reporting is turning into less breaking news and more kind of update. And what I mean by this is I just checked, and the number of deaths caused by COVID-19 are 115,644. But you have to dig to find that number. And it's not because of fake news or anything. It's just that people are kind of becoming numb to it. But I want the real number. I want to recognize every life that has been lost. Now, I've mentioned before that after a certain figure, the numbers just become meaningless. So in my head, I had the idea of 115,644 being something like the number of people that lived in the town where I last had a parish. Within my parish, there was something like 14 to 15,000 people, but within the town itself, there's like 100,000. And I thought, 115,644. Just think, if I went away for my sabbatical, 3 months, and for whatever reason didn't get in contact with anybody, and then when I came back, there was nobody there. All the houses were empty. All the cars were just in place. Nobody on the roads. You go into the town centre, none of the shops are open. There's nothing. The hospitals are closed. There's no doctors. There's no nurses. There's no fire people, police. There's nothing. In my mind, that gives me an idea of just what that number represents. To move it further on, it represents a husband, a wife, a child, a father, a mother, a grandparent, somebody who is loved. It represents every form of work we do, from scientists to nurses and doctors to sanitary people who do the waste disposal to bus people. It's so indiscriminate, and we need to remember that. And especially at this time, and I just think it's the small period of time it's taken for that to happen, 115,644. And this is essential because I believe there's something called safety fatigue going on now. We've gotten so we think we've gotten used to the idea of COVID-19 that we're relaxing. It's like when you go on a diet and you're really, really strict with it. So I've got to do this. You got to do this, and everything, you measure everything out. You count every calorie, every protein and carb and whatever, and you're religious about it. That's a word to use, isn't it? And then after a month, 2 months, well, this little bit of chocolate, I'm doing well. It doesn't matter. And then you get fatigued by going on a diet. And this is why so many people yo-yo on diets. They lose a load of weight and then they kind of relax and it goes on slowly. But in this case, if you relax once and you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, it can literally kill you. So you really do have to ensure your social distancing, and you really do have to ensure you wear a mask. If you don't want to do it for other people, do it for yourself. I was in Publix yesterday and I was astonished by the number of people who weren't wearing masks. I was wearing one, can't stand it, but so what? I'm doing it for me initially, and because I want to ensure that when I turn up on a Sunday, that I've not put myself in a dangerous place and exposed myself where I can be a risk to others. But what about those people who have pre-existing conditions? Why would they, on any planet, want to put themselves in a place of risk? Why would you? Why wouldn't you wear a mask if you do have to go out? Why would you risk going to restaurants and places that are known to be dangerous places? I don't know. I don't know why you would do that. So I caution you, don't forget the world we're now living in. Please, please, please ensure that your health and safety are still a priority, and that you don't do anything or go anywhere that will allow any chance of you becoming infected. Now, I'm not saying live in a cocoon, because there's risks in life anyway. As soon as you walk out on the street, there's a risk involved. That poor gentleman who just got bitten in the face by a gator when he was trying to retrieve a frisbee. In one way, you think, well, duh, you're in Florida. But on the other hand, it's that one time where you literally get bitten. And I feel so sorry for the guy. You do something which, 99.99% of the time has no risk involved, but then something happens. And so please, please, please be cautious. I've been following a a COVID risk levels thing. This is a photograph of it. If you want to find it, it's one of those tinyurl.com things, and it's called C19 risk. So that's tinyurl, tinyurl.com/C19RISK, C19 risk. And it brings this up, this chart. And where it places churches, it goes from benign risks. So if you're a tennis player, so Dean, you can go ahead and do that. If you're going to get something from a restaurant, get it as takeout, the risk is minimal. All the way up to 9, which is bars, big concerts, and sports stadiums. But then there's number 8, which has gyms, it has amusement parks, it has buffets, and it has churches. Number 8, big red thing. Well, why would it be? Why would churches be such a high risk? Well, there's a little small print, and I'm hoping I can read the small print without my specs. This is based on risk features, including outside and something else. It's got a word covering it, so I can't read it. Something to others, exposure time, compliance likelihood, and personal risk. Now, the word here is compliance likelihood. Churches are up there because some churches, and they're all just sort of meshed together. It doesn't sort of break it down into the various denominations and what denominations are doing. It just lumps every church together. And we know for a fact that some churches just, well, they think they're covered by some personal anointing, that God's got a force field that prevents them from getting anything. And we've seen that play out with with foolish results. Churches all over the place have found multiple infections, and they become the source of infections for others who don't even go to church. Great result there. Well done. And I'm being sarcastic. So one of the reasons why the churches are up there is because a lot of churches, it's seen, will not comply properly. And then even within the churches, will the people who go to attend church comply as well? So will they stick to social distancing? Will they wear masks? Will they sanitize their hands all the time? And all these other things are in play. And then when they go outside into the world, are they going to act responsibly so that when they do come back in, they don't present any more of a risk than they did the week before? It's a really difficult thing to look at. And I totally understand the fatigue that comes with it, because I'm like, I love the idea of having 10 people in the church, but it's not enough. I want to see you all. And just looking at a camera and knowing you're all there is a real comfort. It really is. It makes me preach outwards in a way that is different than just preaching to the church, in people in the pews. I hope that makes sense in some way. It's kind of going out further than normal, I think is probably the best way of putting it. Although even that sounds maybe weird. But there's no substitute for having people. In the same way, having Father Lewis here on Thursday, I kind of found myself enjoying it more because I had a foil. I had somebody who was going to, if I say something dumb, is going to say, very gently, because this is Father Lewis we're talking about, would correct me or move the conversation somewhere else. And it was great. I really enjoyed it. And that's possibly one of the first times. It's not that I don't enjoy doing this, but it would be more fun if you were here and we all had a cup of coffee. What's this one? Resistance is futile. I want one that says Renaissance is feudal. But there you go. And for those of you who want to tell me that the Renaissance period wasn't particularly feudal, it's a play on words. So all these things to do with COVID-19, the actual number of deaths do matter. because there is a person behind each and every one. Which brings us to another thing that's going on, this all lives matter. Well, yeah, they do. But when are we going to show that all lives matter, for the first thing? When are we going to realize that this number does represent lives, and that we shouldn't just fudge it by saying, well, around 115,000, less than 116,000. We need that precise number to recognize that each and every life on that list matters. And the lives of those who are now suffering because of those losses matter. Which brings us to the kind of false equivalency that is in play when we do use the phrase, all lives matter. Well, let me tell you a story. Back in the day when I was at seminary, theological college to those in England, there were 60-something, 64 I think it was, students all training to be ordained, training for the priesthood. And they came from all walks of life, some, and they represented every kind of person you could imagine, from the absolutely brilliant mind to those who can play instruments, church organs. We had a number of church organists and pianists, to those who have beautiful, beautiful voices. One or two who tried to help me, but who fell about the place laughing when I opened my mouth. To people who were very, very religious and spiritual, who oozed the spirit of humility and holiness. To those, and everyone had their good points. Some more than to those who had little experience in, how can we put it, dealing with pastoral situations. And here's an example of this. This guy I'm going to talk about, I'm going to mention his name, but he's a good guy. He had a lot going for him. But he had a few blind spots, like we all do. Now, we had a family, a married couple, and they were a really, really nice couple. They had a son, and they were expecting another child. And then word got out that the mother had given birth prematurely, and the child had died. And this is during term time. We can imagine we were all horrified, because really that kind of thing shouldn't happen. But when it does, what can you say? What words are there you can say to a mom or to a dad that aren't going to sound platitudinous or insincere? Well, enter this man I'm talking about. He had no such fear. He went around to see them, and we learned what transpired within that little conversation from the would have been dad. And he said this chap came in and sat down and sort of commiserated with them, which shows more fortitude and courage than what most of us had. We just sort of would put our heads down and mumble something to them. But this guy went to them, sat with them, commiserated, and then said, I know how you feel. I had a dog that died. Now, the would-be father said, if it had been any other person but this guy, I'd have hit him. So when you say, I know you're talking about human lives, but just think how much you cheapen things when you use phrases like that. And it's a false equivalency. I'm sure the guy who says, I know how you feel, I had a dog that died, didn't really mean it in that way, because there's no way that you're going to say, well, my dog's life and my experience of grief equates to your child's life and your experience of grief. There's no way, which is why it was such a lousy thing to say. But when we say all lives matter, this is what we're kind of doing. And depending on where you say it, it says more about you as a person than anything else. If you've never said all lives matter before and you're saying it as a response to Black Lives Matter, well, what you're doing is you're actually questioning what it means to say that Black Lives Matter. And in another way, you're kind of adding an invisible word to Black Lives Matter, and that word is only. So what you're saying is the people who are claiming that Black Lives Matter have added the invisible word only Black Lives Matter. And I don't know about you, but I've never heard that. I've never heard the phrase only Black Lives Matter. So this false equivalency here is saying that all lives matter, which is true, but we can't talk about anything else that's going on. And yet we then have this rise of blue lives matter. Well, duh. Of course they matter. Because it doesn't matter who the person is or what they do for a living. It's the degradation, it's the dehumanizing, it's the attacking and the killing of anyone that's wrong. It doesn't matter what they do. But in this particular situation, where we look to a particular community that's suffering in a way which is, well, not in a way, in a demonstrable way that is more unjust than everyone else, then it is right for those people to say Black Lives Matter. And it's wrong for people to assume that by saying all lives matter, then you're saying something that is important, because it's just a duh statement. Of course, all lives matter. Now this has really bugged me because I've been seeing it from all corners of Facebook recently, from the UK, from the US. And it really does say more about the person who posts those things than anything else, because there's an insidious racism about the whole thing. And if you want to know how this can be Christianized, simple. When God made everything, he saw that it was good. When he made us as human beings, male and female, he created them. He saw it was good. And at the end of it all, he saw it was very good. And then Jesus came because God so loved the world. So if you just include the people rather than the whole of creation, which is a whole different subject, then God so loved everyone. Jesus wishes to draw all people to himself. There's another big Bible reference. All people. Doesn't matter what color, doesn't matter what creed, doesn't matter what religion, doesn't matter what sexuality or orientation or anything about them. Doesn't matter if they're rich or the poor. Actually, in certain respects, God does have a bias towards the poor. So maybe there is a bit of a switch there, because it is more difficult for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Scripture again. It's funny how we forget these things. But here we can sort of narrow down it even more, because we have the parable of the Good Shepherd, where Jesus has the 99 sheep that are safe. And then he goes off to find the one that isn't safe. And in my mind, this is the equivalence of the Black Lives Matter, that the 99 are safe. But God doesn't say, well, they're all right, there's just the one over there, and well, forget about them. The priority is to go for that one person. And in terms of justice, and in terms of need, in terms of poverty, everything to do, that one sheep is the one we search for, because Jesus tells us to do. It's a part of the priority we create in our lives when we were baptized, that we say we will maintain the dignity and respect of every person, who will seek justice for every person. And when we do that, we're actually making a statement about that lost sheep versus the 99. I saw a cartoon this morning, which I thought was quite funny, where there were two houses and one was on fire. And but the hose pipe that would put out the fire was pouring on the house that wasn't on fire, because the person said all houses matter. And this is it. I really have no in the US. Excuse me. I really have no experience of discrimination. Although somebody told me that I once experienced it, but I found it so funny I didn't notice it, and that was in South Carolina in a bookstore, where this young man with a big hat said to me, "I guess you're not from around here, boy, are you?" And I didn't know "boy" was any kind of slur. I just thought it was funny. So it's as insidious as that. But in the US, I walk down the street. I walk down with the dog. We have a sheriff coming around, wave. I have no thought of the sheriff's car stopping and saying, "What are you doing here?" No thought at all. Because my experience is one which is completely neutral. In the UK, the police were an absolute waste of time. That's because of the times that I needed them and they weren't there for me. And that wears pretty thin very quickly, to the point that, once you've been attacked so many times and they've never come out to find out what's gone on. Once your buildings have been attacked and you just need a number from the police so that you can make an insurance claim, and they're just a kind of almost a necessary evil at that point because they don't serve any purpose in your life. They certainly weren't protecting and serving. They were doing nothing. So in the UK, I have that experience. Over here, I have very little experience of the police. Praise the Lord. So we really have to be careful in how we use our language, not because it's inflammatory in itself, but it kind of betrays where we're coming from. It betrays our ignorance or innocence. Let's put it that way. And this notion that blue lives matter is again, it's picking out the word, isn't it? If the word black is the one that offends you and you want to replace it with the word blue, you got a problem, whether you'd like to admit it or not. And unfortunately, in today's present climate, where people feel emboldened to proclaim who they are in less subtle ways, this is the result. Now, I, for one, hate political correctness. I think it is something which masks real problems within society. And I'd sooner know, because people are allowed to say who they are, what people actually think. Because then you can challenge them and then you can avoid them if, they turn out to be horrible people. Whereas with political correctness, when you're controlling people's language in a kind of Orwellian way, well, you can't say that anymore. You can't think that anymore. You can't do that. People just bury them. But we're now living currently in a society where things like social media really do show people as they really are, unfiltered. And it's not pretty. So within the COVID-19 and within the Black Lives and things. Now, by the way, I am not condoning any form of attacks or murders on the police or any kind of the forces, the EMS, the fire people. I'm not condoning any riots. I think I spoke about this or wrote about this, that with every modern riot now, every modern protest now, there are a bunch of people who want to make use of that for their own agenda, whether it is thieving, whether it is burning places down, whether they have a political agenda because they're part of the anarchist movement, which is very strong throughout the world. I don't know whether you'd be surprised or not. But say at every G7 meeting or any intergovernmental meeting throughout the world, there is often a huge demonstration that turns into violence and rioting, because a lot of the people who go there, or some of the people who go there for that express purpose. They're not there to be peaceful. They are there to make everybody else look bad. And we have to remember at the end of it all, is there a valid claim being made by those who are protesting? It's back in the day when I was at university, the big thing was apartheid, and the idea that a particular religion, Christianity, and a particular kind of Christianity could sanction the idea that black people are less than human, and then get it done politically. It was absolutely anathema. And yet this, it took forever before it became a world issue. And then thankfully, it broke down. And these things should break down. Every kind of injustice should break down. I think we live in such an upside down world. We use slogans all the time. And I know Black Lives Matter is such a slogan, but there are certain things that we say, within the realm of Christianity. I go down 41 as a sign, Jesus saves, try him. To the average person nowadays, what does that mean? There's this kind of pointlessness about the whole that kind of thing. Jesus is the answer. What's the question? The use of Christianity as a kind of prop for one's outlook is very, very dangerous. And I have to say, it's kind of very American as well. On Thursday with Father Lewis, we will be looking at questions of bad theology. This was put to us a few weeks ago as something we may want to look at. And the sky's the limit with this question. And so we're actually obviously trying to narrow the whole thing down. But Father Lewis, we come from such different places. Father Lewis comes from a more liturgical, historical side of things, and I come at it from a more theological stance. That even getting the questions we want to answer together, it can be quite time consuming. The same as last week. We went down so many rabbit holes in our discussions, which we thought were really interesting and exciting. And then when we looked at them we wrote it down and we came back to it. Nope. Only we would be interested in that. Scrap it. So the way things work with Christianity is we have the kind of the established truth of Scripture and of church experience, formulated in the creeds and liturgies such as baptism and the Eucharist, and what we believe when we say and take part in these things. And then there's the kind of cultural outcrop of all that, what actually happens in people's minds when they're away from church, or have never experienced church, but still have this, what I will call a Christian impulse. And I'm going to give you an example of this. What time is it? Ooh, it's 10:35. Somebody wrote an e-manual, e-book, and it's something to do with prophecy, something, I think it's like prophecy, plagues, and pandemics. And there's kind of something to do with COVID-19. And it was a bit like, I think it was a bit like, because I didn't get it, something to do with what we were talking about last week. to do with, does God cause plagues? Does he sort of, does the wrath of God send them down to sort of kill people on purpose? And of course, the answer Father Lewis and I gave was no, he doesn't. Now, when I saw this, I thought, oh, this is free, which is always music to my ears. But I thought, okay, let me download this thing. But they wanted my physical address for an ebook. And I know most of my information's out there. Probably a million people know my social security number now. But there's no way I'm just going to put down my address for an ebook. Give email address, yeah, sure. But there was no reason to hand out my physical address. So I thought, no. So then I started reading the messages beneath it. And a lot of other people were complaining about, this is supposed to be a free kind of Christian service to help people wrap their minds around COVID-19 or whatever the book's about. And they want your address? No, this is wrong. And then there was a lot of people saying, well, we don't need the book anyway, because I have the Bible. All you need to do is read the Bible. Okay. So I read on. I was kind of intrigued. What do you mean by reading the Bible? Well, if you carried on reading, there was these lots of responses saying, yes, all you need is your King James Version of the Bible, because that is the true word of God, and everyone else's versions are a distortion. I would beg to differ. And then some, yes, but you need a commentary. And the best commentary is Strong's. I used to have a copy of Strong's. No, it isn't. Apart from being ancient and out of date, it's of a particular theological flavour, if I can say that. And then there's other people, yeah, no, you don't need, the word of man is blah, 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 blah. And all you need is you and the Bible. And then the answers started getting longer and longer, and more of them became more capitalized, like they were shouting at people, I love Jesus, and da-da-da, and you're going to burn in hell, and wow, that soon escalated. And remember, I'm a Christian. I've done theology and Bible scholarship. That's what I do. And so I'm reading this, and I was like, whoa, gosh, some people have strong opinions about this. But then I thought about it from the outside. Say you were just an average Joe and an unbeliever, that you may have had some contact with some Christian sometime. You may have even been to a church for a baptism or a funeral or a wedding, but your knowledge is absolutely passing. You've heard of Jesus, you know about Easter, you know about Christmas, and that's it. Which now is the experience of more and more people. So say you're that kind of person, and you see this ebook, because this is on Facebook, and you say, oh, I wonder what that's about. And then you start scrolling through all the messages. You're going to get a really, really scary view of Christianity based on all those messages, because they were just so out there and frightening and loopy, that they, if I weren't a Christian and I was looking for to see what it was about, I would be running as fast as I could in the opposite direction, because they were just really, really bad. Because there was just the in-group, this individual saying, I'm saved, don't know about you, and everybody else is going to burn. And this other thing, which I think we should have mentioned in last Thursday's afternoon tea, Father Lewis and me at 3. And that was the kind of opposite side for those who actually believe that God does bring these things upon them. They believe they have a kind of protective bubble because of what they believe. And it's not just a protective bubble against illnesses. It's a protective bubble against everything. The real there's a mindset, and I've actually experienced. No, I haven't experienced it personally, but I've seen it many times. They have an experience of Christianity which removes them from real life, so that it doesn't really. They try and say it doesn't touch them. Bill Ingalls. Why would you look to Facebook for anything serious? Because sometimes my optimism gets the better of me. Sometimes I think that people will behave rationally, and so I'm kind of I do I look to. Plus, there are some good things in Facebook. There are cat pictures and dog pictures, and there are hero stories. So it's not all bad. It's just that when it comes to religion and politics, things just go downhill very quickly. So where was I? Thank you for making me lose my thread, Bill. I can't remember what I was saying there. Oh, yeah. So there are some people who kind of live in this bubble, and even though their lives are absolutely falling apart, and they could, uh, Bill's just said stick to the cats and dogs. Well, the dog's not even in here. He went straight to bed after having his breakfast a few hours ago. It's a dog's life, literally. Even when people's lives are falling apart, they can't even admit it to themselves that their lives are falling apart. And the reason why they can't admit it is that they have a faith which says that if I believe in Jesus, everything's fine. They can't bring their brokenness, their frustration, their Jobness, I suppose, for want of a better word. Why is this happening to me? And kind of worse still, sometimes people revel in that kind of situation where if you say, how are you? They say, I'm blessed, which is a bit like saying all lives matters. Yes, you are blessed. You're living, for one thing. But it isn't, Christians aren't just supposed to put on a plastic smile and pretend that everything is all right. We live in a broken world. We experience that brokenness, and we shouldn't put up with it. It should move us to want to change, and not just ourselves, but society. When we see an injustice, we are supposed to do something about it. We're not just supposed to go, oh, well, the poor you will always have with you. Jesus said so. What can I do about it? We can't just sit idly by. But if your faith prevents you from doing that, then there's absolutely something wrong with your faith. That you cannot critique what's going on, not only in your own life, but also in the world. And this reminds me of a kind of another experience of Christians where the Bible's quite clear. Jesus talks about preparing for things. That, if you're going to go to war with somebody, then you better check that you've got enough people to beat them. Because otherwise it's stupid. If you're going to build a house, you better make sure you got enough bricks or the money to ensure that you get the thing built. Because otherwise you're going to look a bit silly with your half-done house. But then some people think they're stepping out in faith if they just drop everything and then go elsewhere with absolutely zero planning. It may have worked once in some place and time, but we now live in a very highly structured and very technologically advanced society where you need to have certain skill sets to be able to get on and do things. We also live in a society where you can't just up sticks and then expect everybody, to find a place to live, without having somewhere to stay beforehand. And yet I've come across people who have just literally given up their jobs and they said, God has told me. I just don't believe that for a second, because God has told you to plan. that, to make sure that there is a job available for you. Get the job, find a place to live, make sure you've got enough finances if you don't have a job, that you can survive 3 or 4 months or whatever it is before because not everybody else is supposed to drop everything that they've got and are doing for you, who is now a complete stranger. And that is the world in which we live, and yet some people think that's okay. Again, it's really, really strange. And maybe, again, a part of that kind of individualization that I was talking about on Sunday of society, where we don't think about we just think about me. Or, well, the person just thinks about me, the I, me. How do we change that? Well, you've got to get outside of yourself. Good morning, Holly. And we're not very good at doing that. I mean, I'm wearing this T-shirt. I love elephants. I don't really know much about them. My dad, when he came home from Myanmar, the Second World War, he had a number of elephants that were made of this incredibly dense wood with ivory tusks, which of course is an absolute no-no now. And I was fascinated with them from the get-go. And so I've always had a kind of soft spot for elephants. And yet we exhibit such cruelty towards just about everything. Our cruelty knows no bounds. And of course, the end of this, in a world where you can be anything, because that's the belief of who we think we are, so be kind. And a lot of people can't even do that, sadly, because it's all about them. And the more I think about things to do with poverty in a country which is the richest in the world, the absolutely massive numbers which are unimaginable of the multi-billionaires, and the big kind of cricket noise you hear from people like that, who are normally pretty good at self-advertising what they're doing with their, when they set up things with their name on them. And yet, we're now living in a place where during these last few months of pandemic, the rich have gotten richer by multiple billions of dollars, whereas people that don't have jobs, people are having to line up for food. This is wrong. It's just wrong. Somebody could drop $1 billion without even missing it, and it would affect so many people in a positive way. And yet it hasn't happened. There's innate, I think, when it gets to a certain point of richness, it just turns into an absolute selfishness, because it's all about you and who you are. So that is another thing that we could look at, and there's a lot of theology behind that, which the Church of England looked at in was it the 70s? Yes. Which then turned up, this was the House of Bishops, they did a report, which was called, Bias to the Poor. Oh, which really got up some people's noses just by the title, because all of a sudden it was seen that all these, for the most part, conservative bishops, and I use conservative in the British political sense, were all called, communists and all sorts of things, because they actually read the word of God and put it into a document and said, God likes poor people, but not, he doesn't want them to remain poor. And that's why rich people have a responsibility to do something about it. Shock and horror. And this is in the 70s. But no, the rich have gotten richer, the poor have gotten poorer. And that's not just a poetic statement, it is a statement of fact, which means there is something corrupt and absolutely wrong with the state of things. So what do we do with that? Well, we're Christians. We work to correct injustices. If you think being a Christian is just wearing a cross and going to church every Sunday, that is the least of it. It does mean being part of a community because, as we found out with the Black Lives movement, there is strength in numbers. And my hat goes off to those people. You notice it's young people. What is it? Young men and women dream dreams, have visions, and old men dream dreams. I think it's that way around. Yes, the vision looking forward is to change things. When you get to a certain age, you start looking back and going, oh, I remember when, which kind of makes sense of everything is done from a particular perspective. So, from my perspective, as somebody from England, somebody from the Church of England, when you look at the world and the Episcopal Church, you see a lot of connections between the empire and colonialism and what the church has produced out of that. In some things, you can say they're good, and in some other ways, you can say they're bad. And you cannot escape that history. But you need to know that history. That's the thing. When it comes to what we would say as strengths within the Episcopal and the Anglican Church, well, the main one I would say is the liturgy and the fact that we are connected with each other, even though there are different provinces, and even though we do have arguments about that, at least we argue in public, which I think is a good thing. So, where does that lead in terms of politics? Well, if your politics is highly tied in with your Christianity, there's a risk that you Christianize unchristian things because of your political identity. And that has happened historically over and over and over again. And again, one of the best examples of that is, and you have to go to the nth degree example, is apartheid with the Dutch Reformed Church saying black people are not really human, so exclude them from everything. Now, I hope when you hear that, you're absolutely horrified. How could that ever have been said? But then there were Christians who were slave owners. There were, and you have to kind of almost not parenthesize, put quotes around the word Christian. And you can go back to the Bible, and yes, you can see you could sort of critique the Bible on slaves and slave ownership. But you also need to recognize how the Bible modified what it meant to own slaves. And that is an absolutely other different thing. But the other side of it is that looking at the young men and women have visions and old men and women dream dreams, is that we tend to paint with a rose-tinted specs. We tend to look at rose-tinted specs at the past as if it was a better time. It was less troubled. That we were freer. There was none of these problems and stuff like that. Well, it's just a different time, and it's like when I once heard somebody say, "Great Britain, what makes it so great?" It's an historic thing. Comparing it with Little Britain, which we kind of had around as part of France. So again, knowing your history. And I think knowing our history is incredibly important, because for everyone who says that there's no justification for saying changing the names of naval bases and army bases, there's a lot of history behind that suggests perhaps you should. In the UK, there's been a lot of protests that have resulted in the destruction of statues and that are to do with slave ownership and stuff. Places like Bristol and Liverpool were big centres where the ships went from those places to the New World, full of slaves, and some of those people were celebrated in the form of statues. Some of the slave ship owners, and those have disappeared. But there's also been a misunderstanding or a lack of history in terms of things like cenotaphs. Cenotaph is a memorial erected for the memory of those who've died in wars. And they're absolutely all over the country in the UK. There's one in most towns, if not every town. There's lots in churches. And what they represent is a localized directory of those who died in conflict. Most of them to do with the First World War, and then tagged on would be the names of people who lost their lives in the Second World War. Now, during the First World War, at least at the end of the First World War, it was forbidden that people could bring home their dead relatives from Flanders fields, from the battlefields. And the reason why it was forbidden is because only the rich people would have been able to do that. And it wasn't fair because, obviously, in terms of who fights in wars, it's the poor, lower classes that do the bulk of the work, and the officer classes kind of are fewer in number. Of course, they still died. It was absolutely tragic. So what happened is that a lot of towns and villages started creating memorials by public subscription. All the townsfolk would get together and they would get a load of money. It's a bit like a crowdfunding thing, but in the early 20th century. And they would then build a memorial, a cenotaph, with the names of those who've died. And some churches also did. In my last church in Oldham, the rood screen was erected and paid for by parishioners who then had the names of all the people who had died who were members of the church of St. Mark's. But if all you see when you look at one of those things is a monument to war, then it's because you're doing that because you don't know your history, and that's a scary thing. So with all things, there has to be balance. But there also has to be a kind of a reality check as to what's going on. Time stops for nobody. The people who were born in 2000 are now 20 years old. And they're the ones who'll be the next generation leading forward into what should, or hopefully, will become a more just society. Whereas people my age, 58, from 50s upwards, we're beginning to turn around and look back and think, well, I remember the 70s and how great they were, forgetting the riots. And to close with, I just watched 3 videos written by one of my fellow Hydonians about the Hyde area, about its good, the bad, and the ugly. And it kind of reminded me that the little sleepy town in which I was born, which is around about 45,000 people now, it was home to the Moors murderers, a man and a woman who murdered children. And eventually, and this is in the 60s. Also home to the greatest mass murderer, we call him the Death Doctor, I can't even remember his name now, who would get people, who would charm them to get their wills changed so that he would benefit, and then murder them. And there was at least 250 deaths that he caused, murders. So my little sleepy town, what side of it do you want me to tell you about? The beautiful countryside, the cows in the field, the picking of berries as we used to make our way up Matley Lane, or the fact that where my granddad used to live, a particular car would drive by every so often, containing the dead body of a child who was then buried in the moors, not too far away from where my grandfather lived. See what I mean? There's some balance involved in all of this, but we have to take the history seriously and not cherry pick and not dilute it either. Well, that's my rant over for the day. Thank you, Anne, for writing what you did. The modern conservatives engage in one of man's oldest exercise in moral philosophy, that is, the search for his superior moral. Yeah. Galbraith, interesting quote. And of course, the word conservative isn't as many people would understand that word. Anyhow, please, please, please do not put yourselves in jeopardy. Go out with masks, practice social distancing, get home as soon as you can, and keep yourselves safe. I will see you on Thursday with Father Lewis, as I am not sure what we're talking about. I'm meeting with Father Lewis tomorrow. If only we could just set up the camera and you can listen to us making up all kinds of things and having a good laugh at the same time, but then getting really serious at the same time and arguing. Yes, Father Lewis and I are not often of the same mind, but hopefully you can see that and you think it's good. Good to hear from you, Tom. Hope all's well with you in the outer reaches of the West Coast. And, well, stay safe and God bless you all. And I will see you Thursday. Bye for now.